All right. So we're talking about the story of Jacob a little more, and I guess the family of Jacob. We're going to talk about his children now. And we're going to skip a few chapters, and we're going to come back to what happened before. But in Genesis 37, we experience or we see a very terrible situation where the brothers of Joseph sell him into slavery. And when we look at just Genesis 37 by itself, it seems a little weird, right? Because how can brothers sell one of their own because he got a nice shirt, right? A nice coat of many colors, and the dad obviously loves him more because, I think every parent to a certain degree may favor some children or one child over the others because of a certain type of connection that he or she feels with him or her. But this is no reason to sell your brother off. I mean, even if your brother is a snitch, right? I mean, we are told that Joseph brought bad reports about his brothers to their father, right? So even if he's a snitch, even if he is loved by his dad, their dad more than them, and even if he gets nice clothes, it's really no reason to sell off a brother into slavery. So Genesis 37, if we don't understand it properly, if we don't understand it within the big picture as a part of the larger story, it may not make sense. And it may seem like an extraordinary action. But when we look at Joseph's story, or the story of Jacob's family as a whole, we realize that these brothers are not normal people. Well, at least according to today's standards. They might have been more normal back in the day, right? But in today's standards, they're not normal people. Because in Genesis, I believe 34, right? Genesis 34, they kill off an entire village because their sister was raped, right? Like, they have committed mass murder. And so by the time they come to selling their brother off, it probably doesn't seem that bad to them at that point because they've already done such a terrible thing. Because after they kill them off, Jacob tells them, "What did you do?" And they respond by saying, "Should he treat our sister like a prostitute?" Right? I mean, they're basically offended, and as a result, they killed off an entire village. Right? These are messed up people. They've already committed mass murder. But this goes back even further, right? This goes back even further. When you look at the family setting these kids grew up in, like, it wasn't a happy family. They grew up within what would be like the battle of the moms, so to speak, right?
Yeah.
Their moms they were constantly fighting over Jacob, the father's affection. And no matter what engagement you're involved in, like even in war, there are laws you have to keep. There are lines that you should not step over. There are certain weapons you're not allowed to use. There are certain chemical warfare that you're not supposed to engage in, right? And even in like MMA, right, mixed martial arts, there are certain moves that are banned, right? I mean, this is the place where they choke you and they make you pass out. But even then, they have limits as to what they're not allowed to do. And in marriage, we may have, if you have multiple wives, there might be room for disagreements. There might be room for, I guess, conflict. But there's supposed to be something that you're not supposed to touch. And that is the sanctity of the marriage bed, right? In the relationship between husband and wife, there's nothing more sacred than the marriage bed. But in this case, in this story, the marriage bed was the point of contention. And so as they saw their moms argue and fight and get into conflict, they saw that when it comes to getting what you want, there was no limit to how far they were allowed to go.
Mm-hmm.
And so they grew up in a very dysfunctional family. And historically speaking, most criminals come from dysfunctional families.
Mm-hmm.
We may look at them and wonder, like, what is wrong with these people? How could they do such a thing? But if you look back at their history, there's always something wrong. And it's not always a lack. Sometimes it is the abundance of things. Sometimes these criminals come from rich families, well off, right? But just
Mm-hmm.
because they're well off doesn't, like, financially well off doesn't mean that they were like better off than others, right?
Yeah.
And so that's why you have to look at the story of the brothers in light of the larger picture. Like, the selling of Joseph is not an isolated experience where it wasn't just an impulse, and it wasn't an impulse decision. They weren't like sitting there one day, they weren't like nice people, but one day they're like, let's just sell him off, right? No, they were criminals in every sense of the word. And that's why you have to look at the larger picture. But of course, this all comes around at the end. We're going to wrap it all up when we finish Genesis. But here's something else I want to bring up again. In Genesis 37, verse 20, they say the phrase, "Come now, let us," right? Come now, let us.
Mm-hmm.
As I shared before, whenever people say, "Come, let us," or "Come now, let us," and God is not in the picture, they don't refer to God, they don't ask God for wisdom, it always ends up with something bad. In the first case, it was the building of Tower of Babel, right? And second, it was Lot's daughters sleeping with Lot. And now, come now let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits, right? Like, they're not good things. And then later on in verse 27, it says, "Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites," right? Whenever people come together to do something without asking God for wisdom, it's usually or consistently not good things. Last night I couldn't sleep, so I opened my old Bible, my first Bible that I read through, I think around 3 or 4 times. In there, I read a quote that I wrote on one of the pages, and it said that the greatest thing that we're supposed to learn as human beings is that human wisdom, without without guidance and without the input of God's wisdom, is foolishness.
Mm-hmm.
And the greatest danger to society, right? And so when these brothers saw the examples of their mothers where no holds were barred, nothing was off limit, and they did their best to come together and to do what they felt would help them win in this battle of affections. It wasn't good. It wasn't good. So that's that, right? That's the story of the brothers. We're going to come back to that later. But I want to look at Genesis 32. You see, Genesis 32, 31, 33. Oh, 33. Never mind. Genesis 33. Jacob comes back and meets Esau, right? He has spent, I believe, 14 plus years with Laban and his family, and he comes home. But as he's coming home, he's scared, right? He's scared out of his mind because his brother is going to kill him. But thankfully, right? Thankfully, God keeps his promise to make sure that he doesn't die, and he comes home safely, right? But I wanted to go back to Genesis 28, where God comes to Jacob in his dream and says, I am the Lord, the God of Abraham, your father, and the God of Isaac. This is verse 13 of 28. God introduces himself to Jacob as the God of Abraham, God of Isaac. He doesn't say, hey, look, I'm your God. I need to be your God. You need to be my subject, right? He doesn't say that. He comes and introduces himself as somebody that he would be familiar with, because he would have grown up hearing stories about God from his grandfather and his father. But he is not yet his God.
Mhm.
And so God respects that and comes to him as he would be familiar, as his father's God. And God makes a bunch of promises to be with him and to keep him safe and to bless him, right? And to bring him back home. And he says, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised to you, right?
Mhm.
And then in verse 19 or 20, Jacob's made a vow saying, if God will be with me and he will keep me in this way that I go and will give me bread to eat and clothing to wear, that I come to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God. So basically, Jacob says, hey, if God keeps his promises to me, then I will no longer see God as my father's God or my grandfather's God only, but I will accept him as my God. And so this introduction that God gives is, yes, an introduction of who Jacob would know him as, but also an invitation for Jacob to accept him as his God. And so Jacob responds by saying, hey, God, if you do all these things for me, yes, I will make you my God. I will serve you as my God. And so he goes through crazy experiences and he comes home. He meets Esau and everything works out, right? Everything works out. And God has kept his promise. And he comes home and in Genesis 33, verse 20, can you read that? Genesis 33, verse 20.
There he set up an altar and called it El Elohe Israel.
Yeah, thank you. So he sets up an altar and calls it El Elohe Israel, which means God, the God of Israel. And this is very significant because in this experience, through all the shortcomings and failures and challenges and issues that Jacob faced throughout this experience, at the end of the day, God kept his promise. And as a result, Jacob responds by keeping his end of the promise.
Mhm.
You see, what makes God our God? Not our father's God, not our grandfather's God, not our pastor's God, but our God is to know what he promised and to travel with him and to walk with him, get to know him until we see his faithfulness. And eventually we come to accept him as our God because we have experienced his faithfulness. And that is what we need to experience, right? We need to make him
Yeah.
our God, not someone else's God. And any thoughts about that so far?
Yeah, I think sometimes when I pray, um, I end up asking for a lot of stuff. Um, and I think I kind of overcorrected that. So whereas like I shouldn't ask for anything in prayer, like because I feel so guilty up to this point after like reading the Old Testament, and I'm starting to realize, that's not completely the case. And there's a lot of cases in, like for example, we just talked about Jacob, where he was like Lord, can you show me the way? If you do these things, then I will fully believe in you. Um, technically he's not asking for anything in particular. He's just, asking him to show him stuff. And that's okay. And I'm trying to like still grasp that concept, I guess, during my prayer. Because I still feel bad asking for anything, but yeah, I guess that was my first thought.
Yeah, no, prayer is something that's very important. Because I'm looking for the place where Jacob's prays. Where is it? Jacob is praying. Because I think that's what you said is very important. Okay, so in Matthew, this Jesus says this is how you should pray, right? The Lord's Prayer.
Mhm.
We would like to think that the Lord's Prayer was something that was new that Jesus kind of developed and told us about later in the New Testament. But it's actually the very opposite.
Yeah.
Let's look at Matthew. Matthew, I believe 8, 7. I don't have the reference in front of me. Matthew. So this is the Lord's Prayer, and Jesus says, pray in this way, right? Pray in this manner. And if we listen to it carefully, we will see how God wants us to pray. And this is very, very important because Jesus said clearly, if you ask anything in my will, according to my will, I will give it to you, right? So praying according to God's will is extremely important for our prayers to be answered. But in chapter 6, verse 9, Jesus said, pray then in this way, our Father who is in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we have also forgiven our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For yours is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Amen. So this is almost like a sandwich version of prayer. Okay. So the first part is an acknowledgement of who God is, right? And his plans, right? It says, our Father who is in heaven. We have a Father and he's in heaven, right? Hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Right? There's an acknowledgement of who he is and what he wants to do, what his will is. Okay. And then you make a request. You make your request in between. Give us this day our daily bread and forgive us our debts as we have also forgiven our debtors. And do not lead us into temptation, but deliver us from evil. So this is your request part. Okay. And then you finish by saying, for yours is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Amen. You see, the request that we make in the middle, we are confident that God will fulfill it. Why? Because we have acknowledged who God is and what he's promised and what he's wanting to do. Right? So we have first acknowledged who he is, what he promised, what he wants to do. And then in light of that, we make our request. Right?
Mm-hmm.
And then we conclude by saying, yours is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. So we acknowledge him once again. Right? So the sandwiching of who God is, what he promised, our request, and acknowledgement of who he is. Okay. So keep that in mind. We're gonna go to Genesis 32. Genesis 32. And verse 9, it says, "O God, God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, O Lord, who said to me, return to your country and to your kindred that I may do you good. I am not worthy of the least of all the deeds of steadfast love and all the faithfulness that you have shown your servant. For with only my staff I have crossed this Jordan, and now I've become 2 camps." So Jacob begins his prayer by acknowledging who God is and the fact that this entire journey was because of his command, right? Right? He says, Lord, you said to me, return to your country and your kindred that I may do you good, right? You told me this. You told me to do this, right? I'm going home because you told me to go. And then it says, verse 11, please deliver me from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, that he may come and attack me, the mothers with the children. All right. He makes the request, please keep me safe, right? And then he concludes by saying, but you said, I will surely do you good and make your offsprings as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude. So he begins with who God is, right? You're the God of my father Abraham, God of my father Isaac. This entire journey is because you told me to go, right? So he puts the responsibility on God. And then he says, please protect me. And then he ends by saying, because you said, I will surely do you good and make your offspring as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude. So same formula, who God is, what he promised, right? And the request, and then back to his promises.
Mhm.
So when Jesus said pray in this way, this is nothing new. Like this is the way that we were supposed to pray ever since the beginning of time. Let's go to another example. I believe it's Second Chronicles chapter 20, if I'm not mistaken, it might be Second Kings, but I believe Second Chronicles. Yeah, okay. Second Chronicles chapter 20. This is the time when Judah is invaded by their enemies. In verse chapter 20, now it came about after this that sons of Moab and the sons of Ammon, together with some of the Meunites, came to make war against Jehoshaphat. Then some came and reported to Jehoshaphat, saying, a great multitude is coming against you from beyond the sea, out of Aram, and behold, they are in Hazazon Tamar, as En Gedi. So basically, he freaks out. 3 countries are coming against him. And the Bible tells us that he was afraid and turned his attention to seek the Lord and proclaimed the fast throughout all of Judah.
Mhm.
And so basically they get together and Jehoshaphat prays as the representative of the country. And it says in verse 6, and it says, O Lord, the God of our fathers, are you not the God in the heavens? Are you not ruler over all the kingdoms of the nations? Power and might are in your hand, so that no one can stand against you, right? So it's an acknowledgement of who God is, right? He is the God, he is the ruler, he's the God of heavens. He's the ruler over all the kingdoms. Power and might are in his hand, right? And no one can stand against this God, right? It's an acknowledgement of who he is. And did you not, O our God, drive out the inhabitants of this land before your people Israel and give it to the descendants of Abraham, your friend forever? They have lived in it and you have built you a sanctuary there for your name, saying, and then he says, and all these promises that he made. And then verse 10, right? Verse 10. Now behold, the sons of Ammon and Moab and Mount Seir, whom you did not let Israel invade when they came out of the land of Egypt. See how, verse 11, see how they're rewarding us by coming to drive us out from your possession, which you have given us as an inheritance. Verse 12, O God, will you not judge them? For we are powerless before this great multitude who are coming against us. Nor do we know what to do, but our eyes are on you. So same formula, right? Jehoshaphat begins the prayer by saying, God, this is who you are. This is what you have. This is what you can do. And like the land that we're living is, you're the one that gave it to us, right? And then in the middle, he makes the request saying, we're in trouble, right? These 3 countries are coming against us to do what? To throw us off, throw us out of the land that you gave us. So basically, Jehoshaphat is saying, it is not your will for us to be kicked off this land, right? It is your will for us to stay here. And then he ends by saying, for we do not know what to do, but our eyes are on you. So this formula, who God is, what he's able to do, what he promised, our problems, and acknowledgement of who he is, right? So then the number one priority for our prayers to be in the right direction, number one priority, what would that be according to this formula?
Just acknowledging he exists first.
Yeah, right? Acknowledging God. But how do you acknowledge a God you don't know? Right? And if you look at what he says here, the acknowledgement of God and the fact that he's aware of who he is, that he knows God, he's basically reiterating the history of the Torah. Right? Because it says in verse 7, like, you gave it to the descendants of Abraham, your friend, forever, right? He's referring back to the Exodus experience. He's referring to Abraham. He's referring to the Exodus experience with, and eventually how they got the land and how they built you a sanctuary, right? This is also a Torah language, right? And eventually, but it smears into the rest of history of the Jewish experience, but it's built on the Torah. Which means for us to know God and to approach him in prayer with confidence of who he is, what he promised, and the fact that he will answer our prayers according to it, our Christian experience must begin by being built on the Torah.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because if you go to Hebrews, I'll let you know when I get there. I don't know the reference off the top of my head, but I believe it's either 8 or 9, but no, it is not. It's 6. Oh, I think it's 4. Hebrews 4. Yeah. He says in verse 16, chapter 4, verse 16, he says, therefore, let us draw near with confidence to the throne of grace, so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need, right? When we come to God in prayer, we must come with confidence that he will do what he said. And our request, the request that we make, is in light of the confidence, is in light of the knowledge and understanding of that we have about who he is and what he promised. And then we finish the prayer by acknowledging once again that we have confidence that he will do everything that he said. And that is what we see in Jacob's prayer, the same formula. O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, Lord, you said to me, return to your country, to your kindred, that I may do you good. And then he begins by saying, this whole thing is because of you. Please deliver me from the hand of my brother. But you said, I will surely do you good, make your offspring as the sand of the sea. All right. So 30 minutes it ended. Let's take a quick break and let's come back.